I appreciate it. On ICE funding, I mean, do you think that there's a world that Democrats and the White House are able to reach an agreement on what that looks like? And second question, how long would you want a CR to go for to cover DHS?
Listen, I think the ball's now in the Republican leadership court. My understanding is the White House has moved dramatically and agreed to a framework. Nobody's going to trust anybody, so it's going to be trust but verify and see what the leader lays down. I think we need the shortest time possible, and I think there's some back and forth, whether that's a week or 2 weeks, to try to negotiate. And again, what we're talking about here is, let's just get rid of the rogue activity. Let's move ICE back to where they identified themselves. They weren't traveling in roving bands without warrants. Some of the traditional protocols that they operated under literally for years and years. So we'll see over this afternoon and tomorrow, but the clock's ticking.
I mean, you talked about trust. Do you think the White House is operating in good faith?
I believe that handshakes are not the point of the realm right now. We need to see things in writing, and the notion that we're going to somehow trust what their initial position was. Well, we'll do this on executive action. That doesn't pass the smell test. I think Americans would uniformly reject it. And I tell you, this is not just Minneapolis, Hanover County, Virginia, which is about as red as it gets in Virginia.
All right, folks. Let's talk about this clip with Senator Mark Warner being asked whether the White House is operating in good faith on ICE funding as a government shutdown looms, because this tells you everything about where Democrats really stand. Warner starts by saying the ball is in the Republican leadership's court. Translation, Democrats are making demands, and if Republicans don't cave, they'll take the blame. Same old Washington playbook. Then he claims the White House has moved dramatically, but immediately follows it up with don't trust them. He says everything has to be in writing, that executive action doesn't pass the smell test. Now hold on, Democrats had zero problem with executive actions when they were doing it. Funny how principles suddenly appear when enforcement is on the line.
A very short shutdown. Concerned TSA employees might not get paid depending on how long this thing goes on. What's your message to Americans who are worried to see another government shutdown, even if it just lasts the weekend or a little longer?
That's right. I wish we'd have seen movement from our Republican friends beforehand. We knew this was going to be an enormous issue. After the activity over the last few weeks in Minneapolis, particularly after the second killing. I will make clear that the TSA workers, if there's a short-term shutdown, they will be paid back. That is ensured. But there are folks, and one of the things I think sometimes people forget, the contractors don't get repaid, and people say, well, contractors, that must be the high-end, lobbyist-type defense contractor. It is those folks, but it's also all the folks who clean the toilets at federal buildings are not federal workers, they're all federal contractors. And they wouldn't get repaid. So that's why let's bring this to a head, let's get this done, have a path towards reforms, and move forward.
And then briefly on another matter with respect to your committee intel, I know you put forth a request for a briefing from ODNI today. Have you heard back from them? Do you expect a briefing?
What happened in Atlanta yesterday, I got a lot of questions. We all know that President Trump is obsessed about the fact that he lost Georgia and he lost the 2020 election. But the idea that almost 6 years later, he's trying to push Justice Department to confiscate voting records is more than bizarre. You layer on top of that, and I'm trying to get all the information now. My understanding is the FBI head of the field office in Atlanta has either quit or been fired. I want to find out what happened there. Was that because the FBI didn't think this was a legitimate investigation? And normally, if there is going to be an investigation, the person who signs the request for the warrant is the U.S. attorney from the jurisdiction.
When Warner starts calling IC rogue, this is where the truth slips out. He complains about agents operating in groups, about warrants, about enforcement tactics IC has used for years. Nothing new. What is new is that IC is actually enforcing the law, and Democrats hate that. Let's be clear, This isn't about reform. It's about weakening IC until it can't function. An IC buried in red tape, second guess at every turn and afraid to do its job. That's the goal. Then comes the shutdown fear tactics. Suddenly Warner is worried about TSA workers, contractors, and janitors. And yes, those people matter, but if Democrats really cared, they wouldn't be threatening a shutdown to get political leverage. You don't get to use workers as hostages and then claim moral superiority. Next, he pivots to election panic. Trump, Georgia, FBI, DOJ. No hard evidence, just suspicion and outrage. When Democrats question elections, it's defending democracy. When Republicans do it, it's intimidation. The double standard is impossible to miss. And finally, he goes after Tulsi Gabbard. Not policy motives. Loyalty. Character. Because in Washington, anyone who doesn't fall in line becomes a problem. Independence scares them. So here's the bottom line. Folks, this isn't about good faith. It's not about workers. And it's not about process. It's about stopping IC from enforcing the law, controlling the narrative, and using shutdown threats as political weapons. America needs borders. America needs law enforcement. And America needs leaders who aren't afraid to say that out loud. If you agree, hit like, subscribe, and share because this is a conversation they don't want you having.